Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
I'm so honored to welcome Ambassador Rachel Hunt. You're an ambassador for the Recovering from Religion Foundation. So welcome, Rachel, to Mindshift Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be on Mindshift. As I was telling you before we hit record, I'm really honored to be here. You have some real heavy hitters that you bring up on your show, and I'm just thrilled to be in company with such, academics and really very intelligent and well-educated people.
Well, it's the people I tend to try to go after. I guess it's not so much about the academic qualifications, but the expertise, the background, the writing, the research, and all that. So you more than qualify, because obviously you must have a story. I'm really excited to get into what it is, because you told me before we hit record, you're a volunteer with RFR, the Recovering from Religion Foundation. And I've had Dr. Darrel Ray on the show before, and I've really enjoyed that. Yeah. I was going to say, make sure to say hi to Darrel, because that was really good.
I will.
So we tend to run in the same kind of circles. The same people are on the same podcasts, and we pop up at like the conference on religious trauma and things like that. So it's a funny kind of small academic and interested researching community that writes and talks about all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
the atheist community is actually, and the activist community is actually kind of small and close-knit. It's growing, but there is you encounter a lot of the same people for sure.
That's true. You see the same faces, same names, kind of on the opposite side of what the sort of Christian right is doing. We're trying to get the word out about what they're doing and all the other things that are going on. So, well, what's your story? I'm interested to hear your backstory. You must have come out of some kind of religious background that led you to work for RFR as a volunteer.
That is true. Not all RFR volunteers do have a religious background, but I do. I was actually raised in Texas as a Christian Scientist, which is unusual. Most people, if they've ever heard of Christian Science, they've heard of really dramatic stories in the news where, some kid had an illness and their parents refused to take them to the hospital and there was some tragic ending. That was not my experience. My experience was this was just a very quiet sort of intellectual church where we would go and we would sing, hymns with traditional melodies with, and we had the Bible, and the companion book was called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which is written by Mary Baker Eddy. This is one of the kind of new Protestant religions that cropped up at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century. And it was all about, this was also kind of the beginning of the kind of law of attraction, kind of science of getting rich stuff, where everyone was trying to look at the Bible as a guide to how to sort of manifest what you wanted in your life. So Mary Baker Eddy came up with this idea, this sort of almost a matrix idea, where we live in an illusion, and everything that is sinful and wrong and painful or illness, this is all an illusion. And if you can just see it perfectly the way God sees it, everything will go away. So this is what I was taught growing up. And, it didn't take me too long to notice there were some flaws in this logic.
Theology didn't work.
It just didn't really work. But the weird part is it kind of works a little bit, right? I mean, there's placebo effect for everything, and your attitude does matter some. And so sometimes you would feel like it was working. And then the more I learned about science and psychology, I was like, you know what? This just doesn't quite add up. But for a long time, I still felt like, I was immersed in this culture of, you have to believe in God to be a good person, or everybody believes in God. If you don't get it, you must be missing something. It must be me that doesn't quite get it, right? And raising children, I thought, I should take them to church because I don't know how else to instill moral values. And so my husband and I, he was raised Catholic, and, that didn't go well for his family, but we tried going to all these different churches. We tried the Scientology church for a while. We kind of tried the New Age movement. We tried going to these new non-denominational things, which were just really bad. And finally, I discovered the atheist community, and I was like, oh, well, this is where I belong, clearly. once I realized that there are people merely living, perfectly happy lives, not believing in any sort of supernatural entities, I realized that that was where I belonged, and that there was no reason for me to try to force myself to get what all these other people were saying was happening,
Don't they say that atheists, they have no moral compass, though? Isn't that it's one of the often the charges that's leveled against atheists, that without the Bible, without some sort of sacred text to govern our lives by, we're going to be out there murdering people, and we have no
clearly
moral
that's
compass.
the case. Yeah, I have 2 murders before, this morning, and I got a couple more.
Yeah, well, just book in this podcast. Yeah. Then go kill some people.
Well,
I mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
Well, what's funny is, before I kind of got into, the literature and listening to what everybody else was saying, I kind of came up with the argument myself. I thought, well, look, how do you know what's good and bad? Like, when you read the Bible, I'm like, well, how about this? How about if God told you to go murder people? Would you do it? No. God would never say that. Okay, well, some people say God does tell them that. And if you thought that God was telling you that, how do you know that he didn't? Well, because I know what right is. Really? Well, where did you get that idea from? From the Bible? Really? What if the Bible told you to go kill people, which it does?
There's plenty of cases, where God commanded genocide in the Old Testament.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the whole point is you have an idea of what good and bad is, but that is not actually based on your religion. It may have been something that you learned from your parents or from church, but it's definitely, if you live a normal life in a Western country, the things that you do and the things that you value are not the things that are in the Bible. That's not where you got it from.
Mostly cultural and familial, kind of thing you're raised in, as you say, isn't it? The context. Well, going back to your time in Christian Science, would you say that it was, because it doesn't sound like you framed it as a particularly traumatic experience? You don't have like all this religious trauma syndrome from your time as a Christian Scientist, it sounds like.
No, I really don't. Now, I did go through a little angry phase where I realized, okay, here's a story. You'll enjoy this. I was probably 10 or 11, and I was having a discussion with a neighbor, friend of mine, a little boy, and we were talking about religion. And of course, he came from a different religion than me, because hardly anybody was Christian Scientist at the time. He was, I don't know, some sort of Protestant. And he said some doctrinal thing that was different from what I had been taught. We got into this big argument, and I was really angry. I was like, he was just wrong. Why would he say something like that? Why would he just be wrong like that? So I went to my mother and told her what happened, and she said, well, not everyone believes what we believe. And I was like, what? Are you kidding?
Shocking.
I was mortified that I had been so confident and so sure that what I was taught was absolutely right, because that's what, everyone presented it as the truth. And the fact that she was now saying it was just an opinion was devastating to me. I was like, why would you do that to me? Why would you tell me that this is the absolute truth when it's just an opinion?
That's fascinating. These kind of disconfirming experiences. I remember when I was about 14, I went to a Christian high school in the Seattle area where I grew up. I had a similar kind of big falling out with a good friend of mine who came over to spend the weekend. And he, on the way back from church on the Sunday, we got into a huge argument over speaking in tongues, which was a similar kind of thing. We didn't believe in the gift of tongues, and his church did. And, we had a massive falling out over that, and that was probably the first exposure I ever had to a different tradition, and just within evangelical Christianity. But of course, there's all kinds of streams and iterations in there. So they can be pretty jarring experiences.
Yeah. And it's funny because there was a time when I was probably my teens when I first became aware of the non-denominational movement. And at the time I thought, well, that's a great idea. People are, being less divisive. They're being more inclusive. We all believe the same, fundamental precepts of Christianity. That sounds great. But then I actually attended a church like that and realized that is not what's happening.
What was happening?
What it means is that now a preacher gets to make up whatever they want and tell their congregation that they alone know the truth, and they can be as fundamentalist or as crazy as you want. It's just a way to have a personality be in control of the congregation instead of being an institution. It's just a place for narcissists to,
it can be, it can be very cult-like, I think, in many ways. And one of the things about it is, I remember even as an evangelical thinking about the same kind of thing, where if you're part of a big denomination, a nationwide or worldwide, at least there's some accountability, as you said. But when you're out on your own, you're a solo operator. There's no accountability potentially from any governing body or anything to check your doctrine or theology or your abuses of power. So yeah, that can lead to all kinds of problems.
Absolutely. And I was never deeply immersed in a congregation like that, but I hear from our recovering from religion clients quite often that they just weren't allowed to question the pastor, or the preacher, whoever he was, whoever the leader of the church was always right. Even if he contradicted himself, you just weren't allowed to question. And it's just a haven for people, for abusive types,
So
not that they're all that way. A lot of very, sincere people are trying to do what they think is right, but there's no accountability for someone who is a grifter or who is, abusive. There's just not.
It's true. And there's so many shocking and sad stories that come out all the time, isn't there, about poor, unfortunate people who have been abused and emotionally, sexually, financially. The list goes on and on and on. In churches, even in the big ones. I'm not letting the ones that are part of a denomination off the hook either, because there's so many stories. I mean, look at the Catholic Church, for crying out loud. I mean, that's a whole nother story in and of itself. The pedophile priests that have been moved from parish to parish, and that's gone on for God knows how long. So it's not, that's no guarantee that you'll be safe, is it?
Well, absolutely not. And the problem is, in both cases, it's the reputation that is more important than the congregation. And it can be, whether it's an individual pastor that has a reputation that he wants everyone to worship him, or if you've got an institution that is entrenched and ancient and, feels like it has to protect its own reputation. In either case, the needs of the congregation are completely secondary or just ignored altogether.
Yeah, we can't let the church be tarnished, so we're going to protect it at all costs. Like I said, throwing the congregation, the victims under the bus. But a lot of it's coming out now. Well, now, how did you get involved with RFR? Because so far your story, I don't want to say it's unremarkable, but you go out of Christian Science, you church shopped a little bit and all that, became an atheist. That could have been the end of the line. You could have said, oh, I'm an atheist now, and that's me done. How do you find out about RFR and then get involved with it?
Well, I think like most people, I found out about RFR probably through YouTube, just watching atheist content. A lot of atheists are very supportive of RFR and they'll mention it. What really happened was I wanted to make a difference, make the world a little bit better place. And, the trash fire that the last couple of years have been was not easy on anyone. And I got into local politics, and who'd have thunk it? There's politics in politics. People are petty and personal, and it was just a mess. It was no fun to be around those people, even though they ostensibly believed the same things I did. I didn't like being around them, and I didn't really want to do that kind of work. So I just was cast about trying to find something else. And RFR was what I decided to try. And the experience has been so amazing. I cannot stress what a change I felt in myself being a part of this community. They're just incredible. They have great training, great support, great vetting, great community, great people. And, most places that you go, like my experience in politics or even just any community, there's a lot of, drama. There's always some level of toxicity that happens. And most of the time, I was thinking about this before we got on a call, most of the time, people are so conflict averse that the biggest asshole gets their way. And everybody else just kind of throws up their hands and says, well, what are you going to do? That's just the way that guy is, or that woman, or whatever. And RFR is not like that. If people are assholes, they get kicked out.
They don't last long.
They really just don't last long, because we recognize how fragile our clients are. And we just don't let them be around someone who's going to take advantage of their kind nature. We're not going to let people bully each other. We just don't allow it. And it makes a huge difference. It's just such a wonderful place to spend my time.
Well, I think it's a good protocol, isn't it? Because I'm just looking at the RFR blog right now, or website, recoveringfromreligion.org, and it's all about, it says questioning your beliefs and all this. What do you do as a non-believer? Maybe you're now navigating, and their kind of tagline is learning how to live after questions, doubts, and changing beliefs is a journey. We at Recovering from Religion are intimately familiar with this path, and we are here to help you cross that bridge. Our passion is connecting others with support, resources, community, and most of all, hope. We have two forms of support available below: peer support and professional support. And there's phone numbers you can call depending on which country you're in. Obviously, America, Canada, Great Britain, where I'm at, looks like Australia and South Africa. So you can just call somebody, and then there's loads of groups. You can become part of a support group or talk to someone like yourself. So how did that work to become, I guess, is it a volunteer counselor? You're saying you're not a mental health professional in that regard, are you?
Well, I work in several capacities for RFR, but all of it is as a lay person. Obviously, I'm not trained as a counselor or as a therapist, but they do have great training. I clicked the volunteer button and they kind of pushed me into, not pushed me, but they sorted me into the training for Helpline Agent. So the first training that I received and kind of my main title is Helpline Agent, which means that if you call one of those phone numbers, or if you use the chat in function, the web chat function, or the web call function, you can actually call or chat in from anywhere in the world 24/7. Somebody, hopefully a volunteer, will be there to speak with you. And I'm one of the people that picks up the phone or answers the chat when people are asking for support. And what we do in that capacity is really just listen. We do reflective listening, where we'll just say, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. How do you feel about it? What do you think your options are? Here's some other possibilities. What do you think is the best plan for you? Here's some resources. We have a vast curated library of resources on almost every conceivable related topic to religion, where if you say, oh, well, I'm just having some doubts, but I can't tell anybody because everybody's religious, we have some resources on how to decide whether to come out, how to maintain relationships with people who are believers. If you are in a situation where I'm still a believer, but I can't introduce my family to my girlfriend because she doesn't come from the same religious background, what do I do? We have resources on that. Maybe you're LGBTQ and your religion is not accepting of that, and you're not quite sure how to navigate that issue. Maybe you've been an atheist for a long time, but every once in a while you get that trigger and you wake up with a nightmare about hell and you're just not quite sure why this won't go away. That kind of stuff all happens. And we don't tell you what to do, but we will refer you to resources and help you sort through your own thoughts and sort of, dump your emotions, and we'll just take all that and we'll help you feel better. We can also introduce you to community.
Yeah, I was going to say too, looking at the blog, you can click on the blog link and it takes you to a Medium page, and there's loads of articles. I'm thinking, I need to get into some of these articles. There's some really good ones that I think would resonate with what I'm trying to do, But so that's another thing, isn't it? Just reading some of the articles. Maybe that's a first port of call if you haven't talked to anybody yet. Are you on call though? That's a question. When you're a counselor, do you have certain set hours? You go, okay, from this time to this time on these certain days, I'm going to pick up the phone. And what if someone calls you at 3:00 in the morning? Are you gonna answer the phone?
That's a very personal thing. They do not ask us to commit to a schedule. They ask us to commit to like a certain number of hours a week. It's like 4 hours a month or something like that. And nobody checks on you. But basically, for me, I just kind of look at my own schedule. And if a call comes up and I'm doing something that can be interrupted, I'll pick it up. Or if a chat comes in, I'll just choose to pick it up. And sometimes I'll look at it and I'll go, I'm not feeling like I can do this right now. I've had a rough day, and we have a little, workspace function where I can put out a call and say, hey, there's a client coming in. Can somebody pick this up? And somebody will go, oh yeah, I'll get it. And if it's 3:00 in the morning, I'm asleep, and one of our counselors or one of our agents in Australia will pick it up. It's the middle of the day for them.
Yeah. So there's coverage, worldwide, literally.
There really is. And we have a lot of people that come through the training, and some of them are extremely active and have a lot of time and donate quite a bit of time. Some people, less so, and sometimes we don't have anybody there. It's occasionally will happen where a client will try to contact us and no one's available, but we usually will just ask them to try again later, because most of the time we've got real good coverage, and we don't even have to write a schedule. People are just really good because they want to help.
Yeah, they just want to be there. Well, you mentioned before we hit record, you said, well, I don't necessarily have a real traumatic religious background, but there are counselors who do. And you said a lot of clients who call in do. You mentioned something before we hit record. You said, some of the stories that I hear as a counselor or a volunteer must be just absolutely shocking and heartbreaking. I mean, are you free to share? I obviously can't share personal experiences with people's, what's happened to them, but is there like a profile? What are some of the stories that stick out in your mind?
Some of the most heartbreaking things are when we hear from people, men and women, but particularly the women in Muslim countries. Sometimes we get people who are young and they're unmarried, but they know that they're expected to marry. They know what the path is that's laid out for them, and they don't want to do it, and they just can't. They know that if anybody finds out that they don't want to do it, that their lives are physically in danger. Their family members will, possibly be physically harmful to them. And this doesn't even happen just in Muslim majority countries. There are people in Muslim communities in the Western world, in the United States and Canada, where they are isolated enough that, we hear reports of young Muslim people who didn't toe the line just disappearing. Nobody knows what happened to them. And this is in, places where it shouldn't happen. It's terrifying and heartrending. Now, fortunately, there are some good resources. We don't physically, offer resources to people. We just offer digital resources. This is someplace you can call, someplace you can contact, something you can read. But there are places that will physically help people out of situations like that. And we can direct them to those organizations. But that's just really heartrending. Hear lots of things from teenagers who are sort of physically isolated. They live with a parent. They don't have a car. They're not really allowed to leave the house very often. Sometimes they're not really supposed to be on the internet without supervision. They have very limited ability to contact us, and they just don't see any way out. They just don't see how they can ever support themselves without the parent sort of, swooping in and trying to prevent them from leaving. We hear from people who are, adults and have been atheists for a long time, but they have some sort of maybe a mental illness that they have not been able to get a good hold of. And sometimes they call us repeatedly, just, hoping that there's something that we can do for them. But those are sort of fringe cases. Those happen. But the big bulk of what we get are people who are like, look, my family's religious and I'm not anymore. And that's kind of an issue. I'm not sure how to talk to them without yelling. But mostly I just have this lingering fear that I'm wrong. What happens if I'm wrong? There's just, my brain says it doesn't make any sense. There's no God, there's no hell, there's nothing to be worried about. And, my body wakes up sweating at 2:00 in the morning and I don't know what to do about that. So that's a big part of what we do. Or people that just feel isolated. They go, everybody around me is Christian. Everybody around me is religious, and there's nobody to talk to. And, statistically, we know that's not actually the case, but it certainly does feel like it. And a lot of what we can do is help direct people to community. We can direct them to our support groups. RFR has sponsored support groups for people who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. We have our Slack online community, which is by invitation only, heavily moderated and very, very safe, private, confidential. It's a great place to go if you literally have no one else that you can talk to, especially if you feel unsafe coming out to your family and community about your doubts.
We will be right back in just a couple of minutes with the second half of my conversation with Rachel Hunt from the RFR, the Recovering from Religion organization. We're going to talk about how you can join a group if you're looking for any sort of support. She's going to give you advice and information on how to get online or join a group in person, no matter where you are in the world. We're also going to talk about the Secular Therapy Project, and finally conclude by talking about how you can support the RFR financially. They definitely need your help, so that's going to be the last little bit of our conversation between me and Rachel. Just wanted to tell you what is coming up here in the next little bit here on Mindshift Podcast. Had a really good conversation the other day with Stephen Mather and his daughter Celine. They are the co-hosts of the What Should I Think About podcast, and I've been on that show before. And when I was on that podcast with them, I found out that Stephen, he is an ex-Jehovah's Witness, but his daughter was not raised in the church or the cult, I would say. And so I said, we need to do a podcast on your story. So
I got a hold of Stephen and Celine. We had an absolutely fascinating conversation about Stephen's experience, and he and I shared stories about what was it like and the differences between growing up in my case, the evangelical fundamentalist Christianity, and him, the Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of overlaps, a lot of similarities. Really interesting conversation. So that's going to be coming out. The other thing was I was going to talk to Frank Schaefer the other day. We had a couple of hiccups along the way, and that has now been rescheduled. So I'm looking to book in again with Frank. I'm really looking forward to talking to him. And then a couple other things in the pipeline. I've been chatting with Casey from the Cult Vault podcast. I'm going to be on that show, and then I'm going to be working to have Casey on this show. So we're going to do a little bit of a collaboration there. And then finally, I came across a really interesting article the other day by a professor, Melanie McAllister. Now, she's the professor of American Studies and International Affairs at George Washington University, and she's written a book called The Kingdom of God Has No Border, A Global History of American Evangelicals. And so I'm really excited to talk to Dr. McAllister because I want to hear her perspective, especially in terms of the global perspective on not just American evangelicalism, but indeed worldwide. And she is an expert in that field. So that's going to be a really good chat. And that's booked as well coming up in the next little bit. And then finally, what are some of the upcoming events we've got? On the 24th of April, our Mindshift Zoom call with Dr. David DeAndre. And like me, he's an expat. He lives in Canada. We both have escaped America, and we've left our lives behind. We're living in different countries. He's got a book coming out on the toxic effects of Calvinism. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him on our Mindshift Zoom call in a week or so, as I'm doing this recording now. So it's still not too late actually to be a part of that call. To get into those closed calls, you have to be a patron of the show. You can support the show on Patreon, and that gets you early access to shows before they drop in the general public, and it gets you into those closed calls. We also have patrons only calls, generally about the first Sunday of the month, and then we have our Mindshift Zoom calls about the third Sunday of the month. And in fact, speaking of the next one, we have in the month of May, we've got Stephen and Celine coming back as our guests. So I've already booked that in a month or so. So I'm really, again, looking forward to having Stephen and Celine back and having the people in our group meet them. All right, let's get back into this conversation with Rachel Hunt as we look at how you can support, how you can be a part of the RFR, Recovering from Religion.
Looking again at the website. So yeah, you talk about face-to-face support groups, but obviously that must have changed during the pandemic, but it says groups are still meeting online. So if you want to join a group, that's a big thing, isn't it? Finding a new, community, really, if you've left a church or left a religion or something like that. So that's another resource that RFR offers, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that is huge. I'm so glad you brought that up, because the support groups were actually the very beginning of Recovering from Religion were support groups that Dr. Darrel Ray created 13 years ago in like a coffee shop or something. And they were originally in-person group meetings where you would actually show up at a library or a community center and sit around with the 10 or 12 people and talk about your religious trauma with a trained volunteer, not a therapist. During the pandemic, everything went online. And although there are a lot of people that, of course, still really miss that and would prefer to be able to meet in person, in a way, it's been a blessing because people can join these groups from anywhere in the world. You may not be near where a support group actually is meeting, but if it suits your schedule, you can join it anyway. You don't have to be from that area. And we've created a few virtual support groups. We have one that's specifically timed to be accessible for people in European and Asian time zones, so that they can come. We have a couple that are, in Australia, so they're for people in those time zones. We also have one that's just a few months old that is specifically for women only, women identifying people and AFAB, including trans women. And that has been very, very popular. But really, if you're interested in joining a support group, you do not have to find one near you. As long as they're online, you can go to anything that suits your schedule and you'll be welcome.
And then there's one more thing we haven't talked about, and then it's the other aspect. There's professional therapy. So there's the Secular Therapy Project. So if somebody really needs to talk to an actual trained therapist, that's another avenue they can pursue. What can you tell us about the Secular Therapy Project?
Therapists from the Secular Therapy Project are vetted to ensure that they are properly licensed and trained, and that they only use evidence-based therapy methods and treatment methods. They are not going to tell you, oh, you just need God in your life, or here's a Bible verse for you to contemplate, which happens shockingly often in the therapy world. Even government-sponsored programs, social services often have religious counselors, or people that may be, trained in a secular way, but they still feel it's appropriate for them to bring their religion into therapy. And that is not allowed for anyone that has the Secular Therapy Project attached to their name, which means that a lot of therapists actually get rejected. The good news is that this is a need that we knew needed to be filled. Most of these therapists also have information and some insight into how to treat religious trauma syndrome, which I know you're aware of and you've spoken about on your before. It's a thing. It's a form of PTSD caused by adverse religious experiences. The bad news is that all we can do is connect you with this database that's all have their own payment schedules, whatever insurance they take. It does cost money, and you have to negotiate that according to whatever your insurance or your payment ability is. It would be lovely if we could offer this for free. There are probably some of them that do have some sliding scale or something, but we're not able to offer that service for free. But we do the database, and the connecting you to them is free. And that's something that is.
But sometimes you need extra support. And I know we've talked, like you said, I've talked to many therapists who are sort of specialists in religious trauma syndrome. Dr. Marlene Winnell comes to mind, and some other people, who kind of pioneered that whole field, I think. But a lot of therapists don't know what RTS is. So this is a new thing. As you say, it is absolutely a thing. So I'm glad that Recovering from Religion is kind of on the cutting edge of connecting people with trained therapists who know what they're doing.
Yeah. And this is not really a crazy concept. I mean, everybody knows what PTSD is, or complex PTSD. Everybody knows that adverse experiences can cause, trauma. What people seem to sometimes consider a strange idea is that this can happen in a religious context. There just seems to be some people who like to believe that religion can't possibly cause harm, or religious ideas can't possibly cause harm. But what we hope is that even if you believe that your religion couldn't possibly be harmful, surely you understand that there are some religions out there that are causing harm to people, and that is what religious trauma syndrome is. The label is intended to help us recognize that when it comes up.
You're providing those resources. Well, now, as we said, the whole context for how this call came about was someone from RFR contacted me probably 2 months ago saying, would you be interested in helping to get the word out? Because there's a fundraiser. You guys need money to run this operation. What can you tell us about this fundraiser that RFR is trying to put together?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. You're just such a great interviewer.
It's a softball question for you.
Yay. Yes. So every year RFR does a fundraiser, and this is just to support the needs that we have as an organization. We are 100% volunteer run. Nobody gets paid a salary at this. And there are, probably over a couple hundred people that are volunteering for RFR. But some things cost money, software, merchandise, advertising. Every year we do a fall excursion, which is just an incredible experience. It's sort of like a non-religious retreat, which is great. And the fundraiser helps with that. Also, there's this marvelous new project where RFR is going to be buying some billboard ad space in some heavily religious areas. And it hasn't been decided exactly where yet, but definitely going to be in the same places that have the little fire and brimstone billboards. We're going to try to be counteracting that. And those are pricey. So we need donations to help cover that as well. So we just had, unfortunately, you and I weren't able to get our schedule together before the event, but we just had a huge 4-hour fundraiser with Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist YouTube channel, which is Ethan Michael. He's just incredibly generous and very, very just amazing that he got together like 30 YouTube influencers together, and they did an incredible event for us. But our fundraising season doesn't end until the end of the month, so you can still donate. But you don't have to, actually, you can donate anytime. We're happy to accept your donations anytime. Yeah, you can go to recoveringfromreligion.org and click the donate button. I think you can get there by recoveringfromreligion.org /donate. But if you go to the main webpage, there will be a donate button there, and we would be very happy to receive your donation of any amount. Really small amounts, $5, $10 are great. Every little bit really helps.
Every little bit helps, that's for sure. Well, I love the fact that RFR has so many avenues for the, as we said, the person who's struggling with his or her faith or whatever their doubts and questions or problems are, all the way to becoming a volunteer. They'll provide the training. They've got online groups. I mean, there's so many resources there. And I love the fact that, we can help support that and get the word out about it.
Well, I appreciate it so much. It's been great talking to you. And we just can't tell you how much the support of influencers like you and other podcasters and YouTubers really help us. As you know, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of religious people really getting a lot of airtime, and there's hardly anybody doing what we do, which is trying to help people recover from whatever they went through in their religion and help them kind of navigate their way out of it. So, people really, really do need us, and we really appreciate the support of the community.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I'm glad that we finally got our schedules together. We had a little bit of a back and forth, but we finally made it work. So I really, really hope that people will check out RFR's website in whatever capacity, whether they just need help, support, or they want to donate or become a volunteer. There's a lot of things that people can do to get involved with RFR. So thank you so much, Rachel, for taking the time out of your busy day to talk to me.
Thank you so much. And I just want to emphasize, we say RFR for short, but if you're looking for the website, it's recoveringfromreligion.org.
That's true. Yeah, we need to clarify that. We don't want people going to the wrong place. So thank you so much for clarifying that too.
Great. Thank you.